Good morning, and thank you for joining me for this week's edition of Soul Call Friday. We're getting ready to get started. We have a great episode for you today. So tell your friends, get everybody on. If you have a prayer group, an intercessory group, an encounter group, get them on. You're going to love what we're going to cover today. I am sitting here with Angela Powers, and we're going to find out, Angela, so what is it that you'd like to talk about today concerning your soul?
Well, yes, ma'am. There's so much to cover. And as a prophet, I think I'd like to start with my childhood
Hmm.
because it's the foundation of a lot of things in my soul. And of course, the foundation of a lot of things that makes me the prophet that I am.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. Come on. So, where do you want to start? What is the most pressing thing you want to cover right now?
Okay. So, well, first of all, I should say that I was born with sickle cell anemia, which my parents did not realize that they could produce a child with sickle cell
Mm.
disease until after I was already here. They actually ended up divorced before I was even a year old. By the time I was 6, I wanted to commit suicide.
At 6 years old. Now, how does a 6 year old come up with that idea?
Yeah, well, I lived through a lot of byproduct of divorce,
Hmm.
emotional byproduct, in the sense that whatever my mom felt and carried about the fact that that marriage did not work got dumped on me.
Oh my goodness.
I
Now,
be,
which you have siblings?
I am my mother's only child, but my father
Hmm.
has other children, so I have siblings under my father, but not under my mother.
Mm. So you got it.
Yeah, I became the receptacle of her frustration, her anger, her disappointment, her insecurities,
Hmm. How'd that
everything.
show up? I mean, if you wanted me to know physically what that was like, how did that show up for a 6 year old?
Yeah, it showed up in her behaviors verbally and physically.
Hmm.
I can remember being in a car ride and forgetting to have something in my backpack and getting punched,
Mm.
and it broke my glasses
Oh my
while we were
gosh.
driving
While you
along.
were wearing them. Oh
Yes,
my goodness. And so how were you injured badly during that time?
it did not injure me at all. It just broke
Okay.
the glasses. It hurt, but I
Hmm.
didn't have like a cut, anything that
Okay.
would show that
So
had
bring
happened.
me to the moment we'd like to know. Bring us to the moment where you contemplated suicide as a 6 year old.
Yeah, well, I could feel and carry in my soul all of that pain and all
Hmm.
that anger and all that frustration. And I began to accept a narrative that my mom doesn't want me. She doesn't want me here.
Hmm.
And so if my own mother doesn't want me, I don't want to be here. I don't want to live.
And so, what would have been your course of action at 6? You obviously gave it a lot of thought.
hmm Well, actually, I don't even know if I had reached the stage of studying or reading anything about how to make that happen.
Hmm.
I just knew suicide existed. My mother didn't want me. I want to die.
My God. Now, how do we move through that? What brought you past that?
Yeah, well, what brought me past that was thank God for a grandmother, a praying
Uh-huh.
grandmother.
We love. Let me tell you about all y'all blessed and praying grandmamas, okay? Because I'm gonna tell you something. When those mamas flop, those grandmothers pick up the slack and they get you through.
Oh my God.
Talk to us about your praying grandmother.
My praying grandmother was discerning, much like you.
Hmm.
And she said, I noticed something different in your countenance. Will you talk to me and tell me what's wrong?
Mm.
And so I sat on her lap and I just told her, I said, Grandmama, I don't want to live anymore.
Hmm.
So she took me to her pastor.
Mm.
And I sat in the pastor's office and he began to talk to me about Jesus.
Oh.
But the light bulb that went off as he did so was realizing that if Jesus died for me, that meant that he wanted me here.
Hmm.
And so it didn't matter who else didn't want me here
Mm.
because Jesus did.
Oh my God.
And it was like a light bulb just went off for me in that moment in his office.
Hmm.
And that's where I met God, the God of life,
Mm.
my reason for living.
And you're how old?
6 years
So
old.
how do you know that you met God, the God of life? I think that because so many times, Angela, people say that I'll let my child make up their mind themselves and what they don't know what they're talking about. And when the kid gets up to come down to altar call, the parent yanks them back. So tell me, how, as you think back, as a 6 year old, did you know that you were saved?
Yes, I absolutely did. Well, first of all, the complete change, right? There was just a complete change. I wanted to live, and I
Mm,
knew that God was there with me. And I immediately had this relationship with him where I talked to him about everything. And I always knew he was listening. And I always knew that he cared
hmm
no matter what I was facing. And so he became just very real to me in that particular
mm.
sense.
And he talked to you,
Yes.
and you knew it. Oh,
Yes.
that is magnificent. I understand that. I've seen it as a pastor for almost 40 years. Yeah, I've seen that. So now, so you're saved,
Mhm.
grandma's involved. How
Yes.
did that change things at home?
It changed nothing at home in the sense
Very
of
honest
my
of you.
mother. Yeah, no, it changed nothing at home in the sense of my mother's behavior and what I had to live through. What it changed was the fact that it was no longer steering me in a course of self destruction.
Okay.
I had the will to fight. I
Mm-hmm.
had the will to still become. I had the will to still want to, study, be good in school,
Mm,
excel, learn about God. My grandmother would take me through the scriptures,
mm,
and we lived in well, I shouldn't say little. It was a huge Baptist church that my grandmother was a part of at that
mm-hmm.
particular time. But back in the day, they did the welcome.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I remember Baptist welcome.
And so grandmama would stand me up in the living room and she'd make me find my own scriptures and create my own theme. Ask the Lord what your theme is going to be for the welcome. And she'd make me practice it. I couldn't stumble on my words. I could not be articulate,
I
all of
love
those
that woman
things.
already. I just love that woman already.
And so between, I think, having grandmother there as the anchor
Mm-hmm.
and just walking through the Lord, I lived through many other still horrible things. I
Mm-hmm.
lived with a mother who attempted to even use my developing sexuality as a child
Mm-hmm.
as a weapon against my father.
In what ways?
I lived with a mother who tried to convince me, you don't have to wait. You should go ahead and start having sex. Let me know. I'll put you on the pill.
Mm.
All of these different things.
Wow. Wow. And how did you resist it? I mean, was it grandma that helped you resist it? Was it your church life that helped? Or did your dad intervene at all?
Well, my dad was an intervention in the sense that he was always involved as a father, even though he was long distance. He was
Mm-hmm.
not just absentee gone.
Okay.
Okay. So therefore, I always had the sense of the daddy's girl
Yeah.
in that particular sense. But honestly, what helped me resist it was what I saw in my mother.
Yeah, well, she sure didn't sell it well, did she?
No, unfortunately. My mother went through the rest of her life like serial boyfriends.
Mm-hmm.
And she would change. I would say as a child, my mom changes boyfriends like socks.
Oh my goodness. So she had some real issues in terms of her own looking for Mr. Correct, right, and proper through the wrong mechanisms. We talk
Yes.
about that another time. But
Yes.
let's get you to the school thing. Now, how did you get through school with
Mhm.
all of this abuse going on? Was it ever evident to any of your teachers or anything?
I don't know that. Well, no, it was never evident to any of my teachers. There was a time where my grandmother was attempting to intervene,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a window where child services was involved momentarily with
Mhm.
that. But in the school system, no, there was not anything that was ever pulled out or
Mm.
drawn out. But I think that was also more old school years.
Yeah.
The way it is now, the climate now is very different.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. So, did your mom and your grandmother ever have any conflict over this?
absolutely.
I bet it was some sort of knockdown, almost drag out.
Oh,
kind of-
absolutely. They had regular conflict over this. And ultimately, when I became 16 years old and I had to make the very hard decision to move and live with my father and leave my mother,
Mhm.
it was my grandmother that wrote the letter that turned the court.
Wow. Because if she hadn't, you'd be stuck there. So, hey, so a new chapter in life. Is that right?
Yeah.
We've got a new chapter. You're 16. You're living with your dad now. Now, let's talk about, before we go into that, let's talk about how your mother handled or treated your sickle cell anemia. I mean, that is not a light disease. And so I'd like to know how that worked with her abuse and her hitting and all of that.
Yeah. Well, thanks be to God because my grandmother was very involved in my life. I went through a lot under my grandmother's covering and care. Additionally, I had divine intervention very early.
Mm-hmm.
And so the repeated crises that I had as an infant, when I became older, God literally put his hand on me.
Mm.
I was a child with sickle cell disease that might have a crisis twice a year.
Oh my.
as opposed to someone who's in every 6 weeks,
Wow.
for example.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's a divine
That is.
intervention.
You better know
But
it.
my grandmother was a praying woman. My grandmother would give me a Tylenol and lay hands on me.
Because back then, that's what you did, baby. Because sickle cell hadn't come to the fore yet, like that. So I don't even know if we were really calling it.
We were calling it that. And I happen to live in a city, Kansas City, Missouri, is a lot of Black people.
Yes.
So therefore, you do have concentration of studies for those types of diseases when you're
excellent.
somewhere where there are African Americans, right? So there was a great hospital. I had a great sickle cell doctor, a Black male, actually, at that time that I can remember. And they were just breaching into a lot of different things in terms of research and studies about treatments. When I was born, the mortality rate for sickle cell was 37, and it's now 20 more years on that.
My God. So your mother did tend to you in that regard, like
No,
took you to your grandmother did.
Mother would do things like yell at me while I was laying there in sickle cell pain and tell me I had caused it on myself.
Oh my gosh. So let's look at that. So you've gone through all of this. You're now 16 years old. You're moving to your dad's house. How is he taking on all of this baggage with his 16-year-old daughter?
My God.
He had to be shocked. I mean, nothing could prepare him for that.
Well, I mean, I would just say that I entered into baggage on top of baggage, unfortunately. Since my father was remarried, and since there were 3 other children there in the home, 3 boys,
my.
Right. And unfortunately, something else that I had lived with in the midst of all of this was also an insecurity and mistreatment with the stepmother.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately I entered into
because you invaded her world, because you know how it is. I want the man, not the kid.
Exactly.
So she couldn't have been much of a healing balm from your mother. Is that right?
Unfortunately not.
Was she abusive as well?
Not physically. This was more subtle manipulations, stripping of the self-esteem, and sabotage. Sabotage was a big part of that.
Now, give us an example of that.
Yes, ma'am. So, for example, when God really blessed me because he happened to be someone with a lot of connections, my father. I graduated early in December, didn't walk with the class till May, but graduated in December. I spent a whole year in this great job at an insurance company, making amazing money for a teenager with no bills.
I know it.
Working full-time 4 days a week. And my stepmother lured me into taking my checks. I was handing my entire checks over to her. Then she had me sit down and fill out a credit card telling me that this is what you do to build your credit. And once I filled out one application, behind my back, she went and filled out 6 others. By the time I was almost about ready to graduate college, she let them charge off. I could no longer receive student loans due to the charge off. And I ended up not having money to finish college at that time.
Wow. At that time. And in the midst of all of this, you stayed in love with Jesus. How did that manage? How did you do that? And did your grandmother continue to be involved in your life?
I buried my grandmother at 19 years old.
Oh, and I know that was a heart-wrenching experience.
It was like burying my mother. It was like my mother was going in the ground. And I can remember.
Well, she kind of was your mother, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I can remember when they lowered her into the ground. It just felt like the greatest dagger I'd ever experienced in my life.
So you had no longer, you lose your intervener. So obviously this is going to drive you closer to the Lord. So talk to us a little bit about that with the little bit of time we have left.
Absolutely. Well, this is when I moved into an even more radical phase. So in other words, when my grandmother left the planet, it was as if God was just fulfilling her prayer that I would not go into the world. So I spent like maybe 6 months in college trying to see if I could be different.
Because I'm free now.
Not be that Jesus kid, let me try, let me see. And when I tell you, I went to Bible study on campus one night and the Holy Ghost snatched me. Snatched me, as in I was under the power of the Holy Ghost till 2 a.m.
At the Bible study.
At the 7 p.m. Bible study.
Okay. So that tell you, honey, and I would have, so talk to us. What was it like? I mean, you have all of your experiences, but what was it like for God to step up and say, now look at here? Because, we all know that look at here moment. Now look at here. I don't care who doesn't know me. You know me. And I don't care who does what. You are my kid. and you belong to me. So tell me, how did you have your come to Jesus moment, as we like to call
Yeah.
it?
Well, first of all, God embarrassed me because, because when you belong to God,
He will
he
embarrass.
makes sure everybody knows it. They're all looking at you like, "What you doing at the party?
And
What you doing?
you know
ain't
that's the
you
truth.
Jesus kid?"
Uh-huh.
You know. So that was the first thing. It's like, I'll let you be embarrassed and not fit in and be
Mhm.
frustrated with that, you know. And then, but when he came in that particular moment, it just was, I knew that my life had always belonged to him
Mm.
because of the fact that he had rescued me from not wanting to be here.
Wow.
And I could do nothing but give him, like, anything, Lord, that I still was holding back from you.
Mhm.
Like, everything is yours. Like, everything is yours. And I remember entering into literally a vow. I think now I didn't recognize that that's what it was then,
Mhm.
but that was a vow
Mhm.
of my life at that particular point.
And we know God doesn't give back vows.
No.
Well, we're going to, Angela, you have been such a blessing. We're going to pick this up again. We definitely want to have you back. It's going to be great, because when you come back, I want to talk about how this wonderful God-gripped girl met her husband and got married. I think that's worth it, don't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for taking the time. We're going to have you back very, very soon so that you can share that with us. I'm sure that is equally an exciting story. Well, that brings us to the end of another Friday Soul Call. Because everybody has a soul, not everyone's soul is in control. We want to see you next week. God bless you.